Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy, and thank you for joining me for part two of our reading of The Golden Ass or Metamorphoses by Apuleius. This has been such a fun reading so far, and we're going to get right into it again today. But first, let's give our audience just a quick recap of where we've been. So, to start with, we were first introduced to our main character of Lucius, who was on his way to a city in Thessaly called Hypata. On the way, he runs into a group of merchants. Among them is an interesting character named Aristomenes. Aristomenes then relays a wild story to Lucius about going to Hypata, encountering Socrates, helping Socrates and staying the night in the inn, and then being attacked by witches, by the witch Meroe and Panthea. And the two sisters ripped out Socrates' heart, slit his throat, replaced it with a sponge. It was a truly brutal situation. They then pissed all over poor Apuleius, right? Or sorry, Lucius, before they took off. We then saw Aristomenes, my bad. We then saw Aristomenes freaking out the next day, thinking that Socrates was dead. He tried to escape the city and they wouldn't let him leave. He then came back and found that Socrates was alive. They then both left the city, only for Socrates to slowly get grayer and grayer as they went along. They then stopped at a river. And as soon as Socrates drank some water, all of a sudden that sponge flew out and he died. Wild story. And poor Aristomenes was left to bury his friend and then tell this tale to Lucius. Well, Lucius was more intrigued than anything. And we find out sort of the kind of character that Lucius is as we go forward. He was just inspired. He wanted to know more about these witches. So he goes on to Hypata, and he winds up meeting up with this employer. He has a letter of reference, and this employer is a man named Milo. And Milo is apparently incredibly rich, but is an absolute spendthrift. So when he gets there, he notices that this guy won't spend any money on anything. And he has this young, gorgeous, servant, I guess you would say, right, with him. And her name is Photis. And immediately our man Lucius is attracted to Photis and really wants to get with Photis. But first he decides he's going to go try to find something to eat. That doesn't wind up happening. He comes back. He does wind up having a meal with Milo, but Milo just talks his ear off, right? The next day, our man Lucius goes out for a walk. He winds up meeting it up with this incredible, gorgeous, powerful woman named Burena. And Burena has all this wealth and jewels and power, and apparently she's related to Lucius. And she warns Lucius that Milo, the real power and the real wealth for Milo, is his wife. This mysterious, I'm trying to remember her name. What was it? It was Philo. Let me look this up. Pamphile. So warns him, the wife of Milo is a dangerous witch named Pamphile, and you have to protect yourself. So Lucius, he takes this into consideration. He goes, okay, avoid the wife. But, that maid, that Photis, she's interesting. So then he flirted with her while she was doing her cooking, and she agreed to come meet him in the evening. And that's sort of where we left. There was also this story we heard about Diophanes the Chaldean. That was the last thing we heard about. But yeah, we'll continue here on 2:15. So let me share my screen here. So yeah, we're going to continue off with 2:15. A night with Photis. As Milo rambled on, I groaned silently, not a little angry with myself for having prompted willingly a whole series of inopportune tales, losing the best part of the evening and its delightful fruits. So at last I ignored good manners, saying to Milo, "May Diophanes endure his fate, gather men's gold again and lose it to sea or land alike. But as for me, I am still feeling yesterday's exhaustion, so forgive me if I retire a little early." With that, I left and headed for my room, there to find a banquet elegantly prepared. To keep the slaves as far away as possible, I supposed to send them out of range of our nocturnal murmurs. A bed had been made for them on the ground, well away from the door. Beside the bed, a little table was covered with tasty dishes of food saved from supper, and generous, half-filled cups of wine, awaiting a little water. And next to them a flask with a cut-down spout, making it wider and easier to pour. All just the perfect appetizers to Venus's gladiatorial encounters. I had only just lain down when dear Fotis, who had seen her mistress off to bed, waltzed in with wreaths of roses, more roses riding loose in the neck of her gown. She kissed me warmly and fastened a garland on my head. Then she showered me with petals before pouring warm water into a cup of wine and handing it to me to drink. But before I could swallow it all, she gently pulled it away, gazing at me the while sipped at the rest like a little bird, and made it vanish sweetly between her lips. A second cup, and a third went swiftly back and forth between us till I was flushed with wine, and mind and body in truth grew restless and eager. Feeling the pain of the dart already, I pulled my nightshirt up to my thighs and showed Fotis proof of my impatience. "Have pity," I said. "Come quickly to my rescue. Now the duel you challenge me to is upon us. As you see me, no herald to us part. I am strung taut with expectation, feeling Cupid's arrow strike to the depth of my heart. I've stretched my bow so tight, I'm afraid of the string breaking from the tension. But indulge me even more. Loose your flowing tresses. Let your hair ripple like waves and embrace me lovingly." Without delay, she snatched away the plates and dishes, pulled off every stitch of clothing, let down her hair, and with joyful wantonness transformed herself into an image of Venus rising from the waves. For a while she even held her little hand on purpose over her smooth shaven mount, coyly rather than to hide it modestly. "Do battle," she cried, "and fight hard, since I'll not retreat an inch, no turn my back. If you're a man, attack me face to face. Take aim, strike eagerly, kill me as you die. Warfare today admits no quarter." So saying, she climbed onto the bed, tentatively settled on top of me, then plunged up and down repeatedly with sinuous movements of her supple hips as she satiated me with the fruits of overarching pleasure. Excuse me. Until our energy flagged, our limbs grew slack, and we collapsed together, exhausted, caressing each other and panting with dear life. We spent the whole night dueling like this, drinking wine now and then to ease fatigue, rouse our passion, and renew our pleasures, till a while before dawn. With that night, our model, we constructed many another just the same. One day it chanced that Birenna pressed me to come to supper at her house, and though I tried various excuses, she was having none of it. So I had to go to Fotis and ratify it with her, as if I were taking the auspicious. Though she was reluctant for me to stray even a hair's breadth from her, she generously granted me brief leave from military duty. She warned me, "Take care to come back early, because there's a gang of wild young noblemen who disturb the common peace. There are people murdered, and their bodies left lying in the street. And the town's too far from the nearest army barracks to put an end to all their slaughter. Envy of your fine clothes and their contempt for foreigners might count against you." "Darling Fotis, don't worry," I said. "I'd rather my own pleasure than someone else's banquet, so I'll ease your concern with a swift return. Besides, I won't go unaccompanied. With a short sword at my side as usual, I'll be wearing a guarantee of safety. And so prepared, I ventured out to supper. The supper party. The supper table was crowded, and since Verena was one of the leading hostesses of Ipata, the flower of society was there. The tables of polished citron wood were richly inlaid with ivory. The couches were draped in cloth of gold, and each of the various ample wine cups was a costly work of art. Skillfully molded glass here, flawless crystal there, shining silver and gleaming gold, cleverly carved amber, and precious stones hollowed for drinking. Every barely possible kind was there. A crowd of elegantly dressed waiters served from loaded platters, while curly headed lads in handsome gear offered vintage wines in those jeweled cups. After the lamps were brought, conversation flourished, with plenty of wit and banter, bringing laughter on every side. Then it was Birena turned to me and asked, "How does our town suit you, nephew? As far as I'm aware, our temples, baths, and other public buildings are far superior to other cities, and we're well provided with life's necessities. We offer freedom to the leisured, the bustle of Rome to the traveling businessman, and then there are quiet little villas for the unassuming tourist. In short, we're the pleasure seeker's destination for the whole province." What you say is true, I answered. I don't think I've ever achieved a greater freedom, though I live in terror of the dark, inescapable lairs of the magic arts. They say not even the sepulchres of the dead are safe, that the old witches hunt for relics and severed bits of corpses at gravesides and pyres in order to work the living deadly harm. And even while the funeral rites are performed, they flit there before the family and forestall the burial. To this, another guest added, "Indeed, and here they don't even spare the living. There was a man who was subjected to that kind of thing, whose face was completely mutilated and disfigured." At his words, the whole party dissolved into unrestrained mirth, and every face turned towards a guest and reclined alone in a corner. Embarrassed by the general gaze, he murmured in annoyance and tried to rise and leave, but Birhenna cried, "No, no, dear Telephron, please stay a while longer. Be kind as ever and tell us that tale of yours again, so my nephew Lucius here can enjoy the charm of your delightful storytelling." "My lady," he said, "you as ever are true to your inviolable good manners, but some people's rudeness is scarcely to be borne." He was really upset, but Berhenna persisted, and despite his reluctance, swearing her guest to silence, she urged him to continue, and finally won her wish. And so Telephron pushed back the coverings of his couch in a heap, and sitting half upright, leaning on his left elbow, stretched out his right hand in an oratorical style, curving the little ring finger inwards, fully extending the middle index fingers, raising the thumb, ready to strike, and leaning forward gently as he began. Telephron's tale, guarding the body. When I was a student in Miletus, I sailed across to watch the Olympic Games. And since I wanted to visit the region too of the famous province, I traveled all through Thessaly and arrived one lucky day at Larissa. Since my purse was feeling rather thin, I was wandering all over town, seeking a source of funds, when I saw a tall old man standing on a block of stone in the middle of the marketplace, announcing that anyone willing to guard a corpse for a night might bid for the work. "What's this?" I asked of a passerby. "Are corpses here in the habit of running off?" "Hush, young man," he replied. "You're an innocent stranger, and it seems you don't realize you're in Thessaly, where witches are always gnawing away bits of dead men's faces to use in their magic arts." "Tell me then, if you would," I countered, "what this guardianship involves." "Well, firstly," he replied, "you need to stay wide awake all night, eyes straining unblinkingly and fixed on the corpse, and never glancing around you or letting your concentration waver, because those dreadful women have the power to change their shape and can creep up on you silently, transform to any sort of creature they wish, defeating the sun's eyes or the gaze of justice. They can look like dogs, or birds, or mice, or even flies. Then they send the watcher to sleep with dreadful incantations. No one could count the number of tricks those evil women contrive to gain their wish. Yet only 4 or 5 pieces of gold are the pay for this dangerous task. Oh, yes, I almost forgot to say that if by the morning any piece of the body's face is damaged, the watcher must part with bits sliced from his own face to replace the portions removed. Despite this, I plucked up my courage like a man, went straight up to the crier and said, "You can stop advertising. Hand over the cash. 10 gold pieces," he said, "will be waiting for you. But now, young man, beware. The dead was a son of one of our leading families. Guard him carefully from those evil harpies." "That's all nonsense to me," I replied. "Not worth a trifle. You see before you a man of iron, unsleeping like Argus. I'm eyes all over, and keen of sight than Licinius himself." I barely finished speaking when he dragged me off swiftly to a house whose entrance was bolted, and led me through a small back door and into a darkened room with barred windows, where he pointed to a weeping woman robed in black. He approached her, saying, "Here's the man I've contracted to guard your husband's body securely." She parted her hair that fell loose, and with her husband brushed it either side of his face, beautiful even in grief. Then looking at me, she said, "Please see that you watch as vigilantly as you can." "Don't worry," I replied. "Just give me a little bonus." So I just want to pause for a second, and we're going to talk about a few of this, right? Well known that witches or these magical women, these priestesses, can be dogs, birds, mice, or even flies. The magical gadfly, right? Tiresias becomes a mouse famously. Birds we see with the cult of Aphrodite for sure. Dogs with Hecate, Cerberus, and others, Artemis. Lots of magic here, right? Then we have them described as like evil harpies. For you who don't remember, the harpies are the bird-bodied women who are talked about in the, I believe it's the Odyssey, and they're said to be tormenting. They torment and stop this guy from ever eating. You know, Argus is, you know, it's what the Argo is named after. God, I'm trying to remember now. What is Argus? One second here. Yeah, the 100-eyed giant, Argos Panoptes, right? And he was, yeah, wow. I'm just going to read you a second here from, we'll go to this tab here, which you can see this is from Theoi, which is one of my favorite resources if you're ever looking for anything on the Greek gods or anything. So Argos Panoptes was a 100-eyed giant of Argolis in the Peloponnese. Once when Zeus was consorting with the Argive nymph Io, his jealous wife Hera appeared on the scene. The god quickly transformed her into a white heifer, but the goddess was not deceived and demanded the animal as a gift. She then appointed Argos Panoptes as its guard, so guarding it with the 100 eyes. Zeus sent Hermes to surreptitiously rescue his lover. The god lulled the giant to sleep with his music and slew him with his sword. From this conquest, he earned the title Ergiphantes, slayer of Argos. Hera rewarded Argos for his service by placing his 100 eyes on the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock. So cool. I just wanted you guys to know what that reference was. So we'll go back to our story here. and then keener sight than Licinius himself. What's Licinius? So let's see here. Right, Licinius, right? That's one of the let's see here. The brother, it's one of the brothers, Itus and Licinius, who give chase after the Dioscorides abduct these girls from Messenia. Okay, so let's continue here. Where were we? All right, little bonus. Okay, sorry for the little jump there. All right. The matter being agreed, she took me into an adjoining room where the corpse lay, covered with pure white linen. She called in 7 mourners as witnesses, uncovering the body with her own hand, and after a lot more weeping, she made all swear a solemn oath. And while one dutifully wrote down her inventory of the dead, she pointed out each individual feature. Behold, she said, 1 nose intact, 2 untouched eyes, 2 ears whole, the lips unscathed, 1 chin complete. Citizens good and true, bear testimony to this. Once finished, the tablets were sealed, and she prepared to leave. But I said, Madam, would you see that I've everything I need? What might that be? She answered. A large lamp, I said. Enough oil to keep it burning till dawn, hot water, wine in a cup, and a plate of what's left from supper. Away with you, fool, she replied with a shake of her head, asking for a meal in a house of mourning. There's been no food, not a puff of smoke in the house for days on end. Do you think you're here for a banquet? Adapt yourself to the moment with tears and lament. And turning to her maid, she cried, Myrrhine, hand him the lamp and the oil, then lock him in and go at once. Telephron's Tale, Conjuring the Dead. Left alone to look after the corpse, I rubbed my eyes and readied them for vigil, keeping up my spirits by humming a song as twilight fell and darkness came. The deeper darkness and deepest hush, and at last the dead of night. Fear gradually crept over me. Suddenly, a weasel appeared, halted in front of me, and fixed me with its piercing eyes. It was far too bold for such a tiny creature, and that was troubling. In the end, I shouted, Off with you, impure beast. Go and hide with your weasel friends before you feel the weight of my hand. And make it quick. Off you go. It turned at once and fled from the confines of the room. Instantly, I fell into a profound abyss of sleep. Even the god of Delphi would have had trouble deciding which of us in the room might be the corpse. I lay so motionless I was barely alive, and needed another watcher for myself. The cock crow from the crested ranks was sounding a truce to night, when I woke at last and in a panic ran in terror to the body. I brought the lamp up close, uncovered the face and examined it carefully, item by item, but everything was there. Then the poor weeping wife entered the room, with the witnesses as before. At once she fell anxiously on the corpse, kissing it long and passionately, and subjecting every detail to the lamp's judgment. Then she turned and summoned her steward, Philodespotos, and told him to give the successful guard his reward without delay. He paid me there and then. We're extremely grateful to you, young man, she said. By Hercules, in return for this dedicated service of yours, we count you among our friends. I was filled with joy by this welcome windfall, and delighted at the gleaming gold coins that jingled together in my hands. Rather, my lady, I said, consider me one of your servants, and whenever you need the like again, call on me without question. No sooner had I uttered such an inauspicious omen than the household began to curse me, and launched themselves at me with whatever weapons they could muster. One thumped my jaws with his fist, another pounded my shoulders with his elbows, a third thrust violently at my ribs. With the flat of his hands, they jumped on me, kicked me, grabbed my hair, and tore my clothes. Torn and mangled, like Pentheus or Orpheus the bard, I was tumbled out of the house. So Pentheus was that man in the Bacchae who is ripped apart by the Maenads and Dionysus, right? Orpheus is also ripped apart by the Maenads, right? For doing bad stuff to young boys, we'll say. All right. Where was I? Sorry. Oops. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. As I recovered my strength in the street, I reflected on that thoughtless, ill-omened remark and couldn't but agree. I deserved an even worse beating than I'd had. Just then, the buyer emerged from the house, and the dead man was celebrated and mourned for the last time. He was borne through the marketplace in open funeral procession, a hereditary rite appropriate to a leading citizen. Then an old man dressed in black, grieving, weeping, tearing at his fine white hair, hastened to take hold of the bier with both hands and cried out in a passionate voice, broken by frequent sobs. Citizens, for honor's sake, it's your public duty to grant justice to a victim and take stern vengeance on this wicked, guilty woman for the worst of crimes. For she herself, none other, poisoned this poor young nephew of mine in order to please her lover and steal the estate. The old man kept on shouting these lamentable accusations till the crowd on all sides was aroused, the plausibility of the motive lending him credibility. The called for fire, rooted out stones, and urged a gang of youths to kill the woman. With serviceable tears and swearing by all the gods as devoutly as one can, she denied the dreadful deed. So the old man spoke again. Let's put the truth to the test. Let divine providence judge. There's a man here came called Zacchus, a first-rate Egyptian seer, whom I've paid a fortune to conjure my nephew's spirits back from the dead and reanimate his corpse for a moment, as it was before his death. And he introduced a youth with shaven head, wearing a long linen robe and palm leaf sandals. The old man kissed the seer's hands a while and clasped the knees in supplication. Take pity on us, priest. Take pity, he begged. By the heavenly stars, by the powers of hell, by the natural elements, by the silence of the night, by the sanctuaries of Coptus, by the Nile's inundations, by the mysteries of Memphis and Sistra, of Pharos, grant eyes closed for eternity a brief glimpse of the sun and illuminate them with its rays. We have no argument with fate, nor deny the earth its own. We only ask for an instant of life to solace us with revenge. The seer, yielding to his request, touched the corpse's mouth with a certain little herb and placed another on its chest. Then he turned to the east and invoked in silence the vast power of the rising sun, rousing the spectators at the awesome sight to ready expectation of miracle. Wow. So we have a Egyptian seer here, and Coptus. Coptus, the sanctuaries of Coptus are in Egypt along the Nile. We can see that here. Gotta love topos. And Pharos. We can see the city Pharos right here on the coast. Amazing. Love it. All right, let's continue. Tell a Franz tale, what the corpse said. Now, I thrust my way through the crowd, and standing on a fairly tall stone right behind the bier, I was watching everything with curious eyes. The corpse's chest swelled and filled. Then the major arteries and veins pulsated. The lungs began to breathe. The body rose. And now the dead man spoke. Why do you bring me back to life an instant when I was close to drinking Lethe's draught and about to swim the Stygian lake? Desist, I beg you, desist, and let me return to rest. So, Lethe, that's the river of memory that you're supposed to cross. And Stygian lake, this is talking about, right, the Stygian abyss, Stygia, that's another name for the underworld. Crossing the lake is one of the things you have to do on your journey through the underworld, usually with the help of Chiron, right? The ferryman. All right. Such were the corpse's words, but the seer replied excitedly, "No, tell these people everything, and illuminate the mystery of your death, or know that I'll invoke the avenging furies with my curse, and your weary flesh will end in torment." Right? The furies are those goddesses of vengeance with their whips. Okay. The dead man answered from his bier, and after a deep groan, speaking to the crowd, "Through the evil arts of my new bride, murdered by a cup of poison, I yielded my still warm marriage bed to an adulterer." At this, the brazen wife, showing amazing presence of mind, began to defend herself by arguing blasphemously with the husband. The crowd swayed to and fro, pulled in opposite directions. Some said the dreadful woman should be buried alive at once, alongside the corpse. Others that a corpse's utterances were hardly to be trusted. But their doubts were removed by the dead man's next speech. He groaned deeply again. "I'll give you proof," he said, "clear proof of the unchallengeable truth. I'll tell you something no one else could know or guess." Then he pointed his finger at me. "You see, while this attentive watchman was keeping close guard of my corpse, some old witches tried to get at my remains. They changed shape for the purpose, but in vain, since despite repeated attempts they couldn't evade his unremitting care. At last they veiled him in the mists of sleep and drowned him in deep slumber. Then they began to summon me by name and carried on till my cold limbs, with their rigid joints, were slowly struggling to obey the demand of their magic art. But because the watchman Telephron has the same name as mine and was still alive, but only dead asleep, unconsciously woke at the sound of their call and rose mechanically like a mindless zombie, he brought on himself the mutilation meant for me. And though the bedroom door had been tightly bolted, the witches removed his nose and then his ears through the keyhole. Then, to conceal what they had done, they shaped waxen ears like the ones they had taken, fitted them to suit, and fashioned him a nose like his own. And there the poor wretch stands, having earned the reward of mutilation for all his efforts. Terrified at his words, I clasped my hand to my face and gasped. My nose, it came away. I rubbed my ears and they fell off. Every one craned their necks to see, pointed at me, and burst out laughing. In a cold sweat, I escaped through the legs of the encircling crowd, maimed as I was, ridiculous. I couldn't return to my native city. I've let my hair grow long at the sides to hide the scars that were my ears, and I've stuck this canvas nose to my face for the sake of decency. Oh, wow. That's brutal. An encounter with thieves. As Telephron ended his story, the guests, drenched in wine, renewed their delighted laughter while they were giving their orders for fresh drinks. Mirana spoke to me. Ever since Hypatia was founded, tomorrow has been a unique holiday, a day when we seek to propitiate the sacred god of laughter with pleasant and joyful rites. Your presence will make it a happier occasion for us, and I hope you'll think of something witty of your own to honor the great god with, so we can recognize his divinity more gloriously than ever. So let's find out, who's this god of laughter? I kind of remember who this is offhand, but I'm just going to go to our good friend Theoi and we'll find out who is the god of laughter. Here we go. The god of laughter is Gelos. Gelos, or Rhesus in the Roman and the Latin, which is important since we're reading a Latin text. And it says, Gelos, or Rhesus, was the god or personified spirit daimon of laughter. He was a companion of festive Dionysus. The Roman writer Apuleius describes the Thessalian festival of the god. It is not known whether this was an actual event or a mere literary invention. Oh, interesting. Well, that's cool. Thanks for the information there, Theoi. Gotta love it. Let's go back to our story. Okay. So we're back here. Let it be as you command, I said, and by Hercules, I'd hoped to find a scrap of bright material with which to drape the deity. I was full of wine myself, so when my servant gave a sign to remind me what time it was, I staggered to my feet, said a quick goodbye to Berhenna, and tottered off towards home. But on reaching the nearest square, a gust of wind extinguished the torch on which we were relying. Excuse me. It was only with difficulty that we disentangled ourselves from the black indifference of night and stumbled over the stones, reached our lodgings exhausted. As we approached arm in arm, we saw three strapping great fellows with bodies like barrels thumping against our door with all their might. They weren't the least bit bothered by our arrival, but went on banging the door with a furious show of force. We thought, not unreasonably, and I especially, that they were robbers, and desperate ones at that. In a tris, I freed my sword from the folds of my cloak, where I'd hidden it for just such an emergency, rushed at them without hesitation, and plunged the blade into each of them in turn, right to the hilt, until, perforated with wound after gaping wound, they gurgled out their last breath at my feet. So much for the brawl. Meanwhile, dear Fotis, woken by the row, had opened the door. I crawled inside, breathing heavily and bathed in sweat, and at once, as befitted a man worn out by battling with thieves in the manner of Hercules slaying triformed Geryon, I surrendered to bed and sleep. Okay, let's check this out. Geron. What's Geron? Master Theoi. Who is Geron, if I remember? Okay, here we go. Geron. Geron was the three-bodied, four-winged giant who lived on the island of Erythia in the westernmost reach of the earth-encircling river Oceanus. He possessed a fabulous herd of cattle whose coats were stained red by the light of the sunset. Heracles was sent to fetch these as one of his 12 labors. The hero reached the island by sailing across the Oceanus in a golden cup boat borrowed from the sun god Helios. There he encountered and slew the cattle herder Eurytion, the two-headed guard dog Orthus, and finally three-bodied Geryon himself. With the great task complete, the hero herded the cattle into his boat and led them back to Greek Peloponnese. Geryon may have originally been associated with the constellation Orion, his two-headed dog Orthos with the adjacent canines Canis Major and Minor, and his cattle with Taurus the bull. His father's name, Chirsaor, Golden Sword, was an appellation of the constellation Orion, and most of Heracles' other labors are connected with star groups. Wow. Interesting. Very cool. All right, let's hop back over here to our story. So that is the end of book 3. And I think that's probably a good place for us to stop. And we will begin again next time with book 3 on trial. Wild. So I think our poor man here, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but if you just slay a bunch of people randomly without talking to them in the middle of the night while they're banging on a door, somehow I think that's not not too wise of an action, not too wise of something to do. So, but we'll see what happens with our next episode. So I hope this was fun for you all. I had a blast. Let me know in the comments if you appreciate me going to places like Theoi and looking within Topos to find all the references, and if that was helpful. All right. Thank you, everyone. And excuse me, I'll see you tomorrow, same time, when we're going to read book 3 of Apuleius's The Golden Ass or Metamorphoses. All right. Thank you. and we'll see you tomorrow.